Breaking news earlier today, both Everton and Nottingham Forest have been charged by the Premier League for more financial breaches. Man City, no charges. Chelsea, no charges. And Wolves, no charges. Today, we discuss the fallout of these decisions, what it means for the clubs charged, and also what it means for the clubs not charged. Roll the intro. Hello and welcome to the Lost in Possession podcast. If you are here for the first time, please do us a very quick favour and hit that subscribe button. As always, it is absolutely free. Let's get straight into it. So today, if you've been living under a rock, you will have seen, well, if you're living under a rock, you won't have seen. But today we are here to tell you Everton and Forest have been charged by the Premier League, again, breaching the financial rules. Reese, let's kick things off with the statements from the club's charge as a first kind of starting point. What have they said initially?
Yep. So both clubs have acknowledged the decision from the Premier League. Everton have come out with quite a lengthy statement, not only acknowledging the Premier League's decision for breaching the profit and sustainability rules, but they've also announced that they are planning to fight this. The club have said that that they understand it relates to a period which covers seasons 2019 to 20, 20 to 21, 21 to 22, and 22 to 23. And therefore includes financial periods as such, for which the club has already received a 10-point sanction, and therefore that's something they're already appealing. They've announced that the Premier League does not have guidelines which prevent a club being sanctioned for alleged breaches in financial periods, which have already been subject to punishment, unlike other governing bodies, including the EFL. As a result, and because of the Premier League's new commitment to deal with such matters in season, the club is in a position where it has no option but to submit a PSR calculation, which remains subject to change pending the outcome of the appeal. And Nottingham Forest have only released a very short but sweet statement, acknowledging the statement from the Premier League, confirming that the club has today been charged with a breach of the PSR, and the club intends to cooperate fully with the league on this matter and are confident of a speedy and fair resolution. So Everton are keeping quite strum on it, Nottingham Forest are keeping quite strum on it, and Everton seem to be a little bit more vocal in their thoughts. This is big because, as we know, this could mean points deductions for both teams, and that would mean Everton potentially getting another one this season after already clawing back the 10-point deficit that they received earlier.
I mean, imagine that 2 points deduction separately in one season. I mean, let's look at the table. So they've done well. So I guess Everton fans, the positive is that since they got the initial charges, they've done pretty well. They've sort of rallied back, and it sort of seemed to galvanise the team. So maybe there's some optimistic Everton fans out there saying we'll take it again and we go again. But being charged twice in one season would be pretty wild.
Yeah, put it this way: Everton have been charged more times by the Premier League than they have won trophies in the last 20 years. That is a sad statement for them, and I can understand why they're probably cheesed off, because they'd say, well, why hasn't this come about with the other points deduction or something like that? So, yeah, it's quite sensational, really. And of course, Nottingham Forest have also been dragged into this, who, have seemed to have enjoyed a bit of a revival themselves. But yeah, it's a mad one. It looks like it's a saga that doesn't really show any sign of ending anytime soon.
Yeah. Well, let's actually come to you, Jamie. So for those who aren't following us on TikTok, let's get the whole debate out of the way. The natural response of many people on social media will be, "Oh, what about City?" So give us a short answer, or your short response to that.
Well, I put it on TikTok. It wasn't just a few comments, Jordan. It was every comment. If you looked under the initial, Athletic brought it out yesterday saying that's what they thought was going to happen, and every single comment had, "What about City?" It's completely different. It's not one charge. City have got 115, 116 if you want to include the new super dry legal case going on. It's completely different. People need to realise that you're not lawyers. You're not involved in any of the accounting at Man City. You're not involved in the accounting at Everton and Forest. So really, just saying that you think Man City should be charged first for 115 charges over Everton's 10-point deduction already happened, plus this. Stop talking crap, because let's be honest, you don't know what's going on. We don't, because we're not there behind closed doors. All we can go off is the charges that have come out. So if we move back towards the Everton and Forest ones, the one thing I'm surprised about is the Everton one more, because of it's like a double jeopardy sort of thing, because it's already covering the period that they've been fined 10 points for already, which I believe they're appealing the 10 points as well. So before this is happening, it just seems strange that you get fined for 1 3-year period, but you're going to get it for the next, which includes 2 of the years from the previous 3. And it's sort of like, I guess, if let's say you have a really bad year of negative profit, you could get done 3 different times for just based on that 1 year, which seems a bit, doesn't seem to be totally fair. But at the end of the day, I guess, you know what, the Premier League clubs have sort of voted for FFP to come in. By the way, City were voted against it, so quit your moaning that this is to protect City, because we're not one of the clubs who are in favour of it. You've got to remember that. Other clubs were voting for it. I don't know who exactly did, but I know Man City definitely said we don't want this. And that's where you got Newcastle moaning as well in sort of similar aspects now.
Well, that's.
But I think, yeah.
Sorry to jump in. I was just going to say that's a very good example of how it can work against you, because we saw it again, similar to Chelsea with Bowley coming in, finding these loopholes in contracts, and I think amortization is called. But the problem is you get clubs who find the so-called loopholes, exploit them, and then everyone kicks off going, let's bring in these rules. And then what actually happens is it widens the gap, because then other clubs can't capitalize on that. And I know FFP isn't identical to that, but it's the same we've seen with City, maybe Chelsea, spend all the money, then everyone kicks off about the rules. Then when a club gets taken over, suddenly the shoes on the
Yeah,
other foot, and it's an issue.
If it favours your club, you're not going to moan about it.
Yeah.
yeah. It's
That's
all
kind of,
double standards, isn't it? At the end of
football
the
fans
day.
are fickle in that way, really, aren't we?
Yeah, of course they are. Football fans are the most fickle people in the world. That's a fact. Okay, it's probably not a fact, but it is in my eyes.
I think it is.
Yeah, if we look at these charges before we talk about FFP, what do we think about it, etc. What does this mean? It seems that Forest seem to have a slightly different situation with Everton. Let's be honest, right? Everton's transfer dealings have been absolutely abysmal. They've not been going under, but other than Richarlison, I don't really think they've made any profit on anybody. And realistically, none of those players, other than Calvert-Lewin, are really profitable. So, in the scheme of things, if that was running a normal business, you would have probably taken that into the ground by now. And also, if you have a debit card and you spend money on it that you don't have, you are going to have to pay it back, if that makes sense. There's no point having a credit card, spending all the money on it, and then be like, oh, I don't need to worry about that, because you will get in trouble. It's kind of that reflection to it. Forest, most of the charge around them seems to be centered around the sale of Brennan Johnson. He moved to Spurs for 45 million in September, and the issue is that this took place after the accounting deadline, and Forest are pretty much arguing that their negotiating tactics allowed them to get a higher fee, because if they were forced to sell by the 30th of June, they'd have probably had to let him go cheaper. So it seems like that's probably why Forest have a smaller statement, because they seem to be a little bit.
It's such a stupid thing, isn't it, though? Like, why are you doing it at the 30th of June when the transfer window opens?
Oh yeah, whatever reason they've got, I suppose it's there for a reason. And Forest are going to fight their case, of course, because they'll say, yeah, look, there's no point selling them for 20 or 30 when we get 45 for him, because that 15, 20, what is a huge difference. But of course, Forest as well have had a revolving door of transfers since their promotion, and a lot of fans are arguing they're being punished for showing ambition. Which of course leads on to the question is, first of all, the Premier League have been active on this, and they've been active on it for the last year or so. Is it because they do not want an independent body coming in?
Yes, absolutely. There's been sort of rumours and talks about it. They definitely don't want it. They really wouldn't want it. And they don't want they don't want other people getting involved in what is their brand, because you've got to remember they've done overall, the Premier League have actually done brilliant in building the brand of it for the league, because we're in so much better, we're such a better position than you look at La Liga, Bundesliga, Serie A kind of thing, because of the branding that Premier League has done. So bringing in the independent body, I think, will impact them from what they want to do for the brand inside. But you bring in rules, you have to implement them. That's sort of it at the end of the day. Whether, like, I know people will say a bit, obviously with City, we've got 115 charges. If we get charged, we get charged. If we don't, we don't. But it's more, I think there's going to be, no matter what the facts are of the case, we don't know. Is the same with the sort of Everton and Forest, unless we go behind and see the exact, show me the profit and loss and balance sheet of them companies. We're not going to know exactly. But I think the interesting one with Forest, before I let you both speak, is it seems like their losses are less than what they would have been allowed if they were in the Premier League for 3 seasons, and that I don't fully understand. Like, that is technically one rule for the clubs coming up, and one rule for the people who have survived. It's like Palace, for example. Oh, mic gone down. Palace, for example, can have 3 years of more losses than what Forest could, and I don't think that's fully right.
But I think it's because championship rules are different. So I
Yeah.
don't think in the championship you can lose. I think it's 105 mil. Whereas it kind of does make sense, because if you're in the championship and you're losing 105 mil, like, you're in serious trouble, because you've not got the branding, you've not got the Prem money. So I do think, if I'm correct, i.e., it's because championship clubs are allowed to lose less, and it's an average. I don't personally mind that. I think it does make sense. Forest will feel hard done by, but if it's an average of 2-3 years or however they do it,
But it's the Premier League enforcing the rule, if that makes sense.
yeah.
So it's not like a combined, the EFL and the Premier League. It sounds like it's the Premier League doing this. So really, their rule should be, okay, you're in the Premier League. While you're in the Premier League, you're allowed the 105 million losses. If you go back down, then it's the EFL rules. That's how I would sort of see it, and now I would probably deem fair. But obviously, we'll see in the appeal whether they agree with me. But it's an odd one, really, because if you are under the 105 million they're allowing in the Premier League, over, so 61 million max loss in the Championship and 105 million for Premier League over a 3-year period. So it's a bit of a, I think it's like very hard done by. Obviously, you're hard done by if you're Everton, hard done by if you're Forest. It's not great for their fans, but it's a really difficult situation for how they're going to sort of get out of it, because I think the rules should be quite plain and simple.
I suppose if you have simple rules, then it's quite hard to actually mitigate things. That's why there's always loopholes in rules, I suppose. But this could cause chaos towards the end of the Premier League season. Everton, I don't think can have their case heard until, like, on their 10-point deduction, until February, beginning of March, and then in April, when Premier League rounds are going, teams haven't been relegated yet, most likely. But we might not hear anything even until before the last few games of the season, which can cause all sorts of problems, because what if the season ends and then you decide to deduct the points? Sheffield United, Luton, as it stands, I think, is it Burnley in the bottom 3 as well? Yeah. As it stands, could survive if, and it's a whole mess at the moment. But at the end of the day, this is a mess that I'm sure the league would have prepared for.
Isn't it? So I've just seen on what you're saying with the decisions, the appeals must be concluded by May 24th. So I think that's
after the season, I think.
Is that after the season ends?
Yeah, so that is, yeah.
That's what it says on Sky Sports.
That's after. I'm pretty sure that's after the season ends. Yeah, Premier League, yeah, so May the 19th. May the 19th.
It runs until the meeting in June. So it's how you're going to determine, all of that. But it's yeah, it's I mean, it's never a right time to be charged with anything. But this is where the Premier League really has to start showing its authority. It doesn't want an independent um, regulator, because imagine how much harder that's going to be. But just before we talk about FFP and whether it's or these financial rules, etc., with both of you two having your clubs under some form of spotlight with these sorts of rules, are you now starting to get more worried that this could really come back? Because if they're really trying to stamp down, they're going to go for every nook and cranny of the city charges, for example, which they are, and rightly so they are. If you charge something, you have to look into it fairly. Are you worried that this could lead to something? Because I don't think you're going to get titles stripped or anything like that. And you'll probably, it might lead to I don't know, the outcome is a points deduction at the start of the season. But, are you both looking over your shoulders a little worried?
Well, I think for me, yeah, a little bit. I think I'd be more concerned as a City fan in terms of the charges, because I think it's one of them where if it's one charge you can fight it. If it's five, it's a few, but 115 just it's ridiculous almost. And if that was in a court of law and someone got accused of 115 things, you'd go 1,000,000% they're guilty of something. I know it's not quite how it works.
Yeah, that's a bit speculation, really. That's the opinion, and that's the opinion that you'll see on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube comments.
Yeah,
That's what you'll find out. It's because it's 115. It's not 115 of the same charge either.
There could be anything.
but
They could be
Yeah, they're
made
complete.
to the most
There's
itty
so many
bitty
different
thing. Yeah.
so many different sections. But yeah, I'll let you finish off with Chelsea before I go on to City.
yeah, I was going to say I think it's more concerning that they're actually finally deducting points. It's always been this sort of loose threat that no one really believes. We've seen it in the EFL. You basically don't think the Premier League's got the bottle to do it, but now I think it's become a real possibility. And to your point, Reese, that it seems like now they're almost making a statement. They've done it to Everton, potentially going to do it again to them and Forest. So why wouldn't you now try and make a statement of everyone else?
Well, before we go on to you, Jamie, I think you're right. Is a lot of people have laughed this off. Oh, that's a waste of time. We don't need to look at the PSR. Who cares? This this is a good thing that they're investigating. Yes, you wouldn't say that if it's on your club, but realistically, it is, because that's the point. Then, therefore, people are going to take this seriously, and they're going to realize that we can't just throw money at the problem here. Even if you've got the wealth to do it, the consequences are quite severe. But yeah, Jamie, you go ahead before we talk about the other stuff.
Yeah, so with City's ones, it's sort of like it's. I'm probably less concerned for sort of like a number of reasons. One is because we've already been through a court case. We've we've had to fight UEFA, and the only thing we got fined for was not complying with UEFA. So I'm more than certain we will get a fine for not complying with the Premier League, because the stances that have come out from sort of journalists who talk to City have been, we're not helping you find something that you're going to pin on us. And that was sort of like the aspect that City have gone with. They said it with UEFA. They want, you're doing this and you're trying to find something. You don't have a reason to look into us. That's sort of what they've sort of said with why they're not complying. Whether that's right or wrong, different sort of matter. The actual what sort of like some of the paying off with off seas sort of accounts to Mancini and things like that. Like, I have no idea. Like, I just don't have any clue. There's sort of like companies that have paid Mancini or other players for services, and that I think could be quite hard to prove, because Mancini could actually, run a training course for kids in a different country and get paid for it. Just because they're linked to City doesn't mean it's technically City paying for it. It's all like there's a load of loopholes, as we sort of mentioned before. So at the moment, I'm quite calm with it, because it's happened. Like, we got the charges a while ago. We've been through a court case. And really, in my mind, whether it is we get relegated or whatnot, I personally, I personally would care, but I wouldn't care to what I've seen my team do, and that's the difference with what Everton and Forest have gone through. They've not had the luxury that I have had in seeing my team do the treble last season or even 5 trophies in a year and winning multiple titles. They're memories that I can't ever lose. So that's where I have the luxury of it. Whereas, like I say, Everton and Forest don't have that. Everton have been near relegation battle and still getting charged. So that's where I feel like it's even worse for them as fans.
Who who do you think, just before I ask the final question, who do you think out of the two, if this comes worst to the worst scenario, worst case scenario, who does this hurt more, Everton or Forest?
Everton.
If the worst case scenario comes in, Everton.
Everton, because they've got the new stadium as well. I think that makes it worse. Forest have been, well, Everton haven't been relegated in the Premier League era.
No, they're actually the longest serving top flight team or something to not be
Yeah,
relegated.
Yeah.
So
that sort of aspect, I think Forest will have the sort of club structure to survive in the Championship. Whereas Everton, it could just spiral and spiral. I'm not saying they're going to go and get relegated again, but it's just sort of like I think it'll be a lot worse on Everton than Forest. I think Forest could deal with it, maybe not come back up straight away or whatnot, but It's just I think it will be worse on Everton.
yeah, I mean, Jordan, what do you think? Do you think it's worse for Everton, or do you reckon this could be worse for Forest?
I think uh, based on I need to see a bit more about Forest's contract, but I'm sure Forest signed insane amount of players in the summer. A lot of a few big names in there as well. So wages probably aren't that cheap. So the way I'm looking at it is if they went down, I think they could be in trouble. I'd need to know a little bit more about like how much they're actually paying these players, but I'm sure they signed something ridiculous like 15, 20 players in the Prem, probably giving them bigger contracts than they would in the Championship. And if they go down, suddenly, well, if they go down, suddenly you've got all these players on big wages that they can't afford and they've not got the revenue coming in. And they could end up in the same situation again in the Championship, getting points deductions. So I don't know. I think there's a case for both sides personally.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I think Everton, with the clout they have, the players they could attract even in the Championship, I think players would drop down to go to them. But I think with their situation at the moment financially, they're more likely to lose all their squad, if that makes sense. Whereas Nottingham Forest could probably keep it, the majority of their players, if that was ever to come to the scenario. Um, I think Forest would probably struggle to come back up, though. That's the only problem. I think Everton would have more attractive buyers, but that's just me. But the consequence could be anything. It could be a warning, it could be a fine, it could be a points deduction. You know, either or. A fine is probably in some aspects worse than a points deduction because you've got to pay that back. QPR have not been the same since. You know, they've not been the same since. So it goes to show how much, some
I
just
think
how hard
I
this
don't
is.
know. I'd say a point deduction is worse than a fine,
Yeah, I'd agree.
but I also think
Depends how severe the points.
a warning is pointless, and
Yeah,
that goes for even for City.
That depends on what the charge is, isn't it? You'll
Yeah,
probably find a warning will come out of, okay, look, you've been cleared, but you need to be careful on what you're doing. So I think it'll either be a fine or a points deduction. I don't see it, you know, being a slap on the wrist.
yeah. Well, let to wrap up. Let's do a hypothetical. So Man City and Chelsea. Obviously, Man City 115. Chelsea not to be charged, but could potentially be charged. What would be the worst case scenario for both our clubs?
um, well, if City or Chelsea got a 10-point deduction, they'd be fine. 20 points, I think City would be fine. I'm not so sure about Chelsea.
Oh, we'd be
um,
right in the relegation zone.
if if City got a 30-point deduction or a 40-point deduction, yeah, let's go 40-point deduction. Would City still stay up? Like, they don't lose any players. Would they both stay up? Like, Let's see
Oh,
what you both think.
well, yeah, 40 point deduction would put you on 3 points. But
3 points, and how many games left? What?
yeah, you'd still,
Still
yeah, you got what, 38?
18,
Sorry,
18
18,
games,
18.
18 games left, and Everton are what, on 16?
Yeah, I'd
So
still back you.
13 points behind. You'd still back us to stay up.
Is there a way
Rele-
though, if Everton have got one charge and they get deducted 10 points, could they go? I mean, obviously this is ridiculous, but could they go? It's 10 points for every fine, every what am I trying to say? Every charge. So could they go like, "Oh, City, you've been deducted over 1,000 points. You're now in the National League."
I think it would only be the case of the PSR stuff. But obviously, if you're adding up all the points deduction, it'll just be one season. So we'd be on
Yeah, true.
minus
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
1,150 plus whatever we got that season. So it would only be one season. So that wouldn't actually send us down, multiple leagues, even though that is a massive deduction.
Imagine. And Reece, finally, Arsenal. Anything dodgy there? Do you reckon, or do you think you'll be fine?
Well, nothing's been said so far. I'm sure if both of you got relegated, we'd still find a way to throw the league away. So I wouldn't worry about that. And no, but this thing, all clubs are going to be alert now, aren't they?
Yeah,
Alert. They're going to be looking at every nook and cranny and go, right, what can we do here to make sure we're not next? So that does beg the question: is what do you two think about FFP and PSR? Because personally, I'm its biggest supporter, but I'm also its biggest critic. As contradictory as that sounds, because when you think about it, PSR could be traced back to when Portsmouth were punished or had that issue with administration. And you think of Portsmouth, okay, they had was it like £60 million in debt because they overspent. They were paying more in wages than they were actually bringing in revenue or something like that. You can't maintain that, and unfortunately, it's all great when you're signing all these players, but eventually it does go wrong. And you do have to say to yourself, this is why it makes sense. More clubs would be going out of business if these rules weren't in. But the problem it's done, it's created this divide. This is why I'm its critic, where that unless you're City, unless you're Liverpool, they're the teams that are going to win the league all the time. Maximum any of the other teams in the top six. So in a realistic world, you've got probably 3 teams, 4 teams that can win the league. Don't go on about the Leicester situation because you're relying on all 6 to collapse and do rubbish. So it's only created a bigger divide. So certain teams will only have policies of bringing in players cheap to sell big. So the divide only gets bigger. Newcastle, richest club in the world, have already been hit by, are already been affected by this because they're not allowed to really spend much in January. Okay, so it starts to make you think, if we can't bring in new competitors to the fold, what's the actual point? And then I look at it and say, well, more clubs would have been run under the ground by now. Look how many clubs have almost gone extinct over the years from not actually balancing the books. Chelsea and City must be thanking their stars they got their takeovers when they did, because it's put you in the position you are in today. Otherwise, it'd have been a 2-team. Blackburn bought the league. They were lucky that it was in the 90s. It would have probably just been a 2-team league for years now. So it swings and roundabouts. But what do you two think?
yeah. I think I know what you're saying. I can see both arguments. I think for me there needs to be some guidelines and there has to be some rules in place or restrictions. I don't think it should be maybe as harsh or as tight as it is, because at the end of the day, you do, obviously we've benefited from it more recently, but you do want to see other clubs come in with a bit of money, splash the cash. Like Newcastle now competing, yes, it's one more club we have to try and get above, but it makes the league better. And at the end of the day, you want a bit of, no, obviously Jamie will disagree. I don't want to see City win the league 10 years in a row. Like, I don't want to see it. Obviously, we were younger when United did it. I just don't want to see it. You want a bit of interest, intrigue. I'm loving it this season because you potentially got a 3-4 way title race. I don't want to see City winning it every year by 15 points or any club. And even I say as a Chelsea fan, honestly, if Chelsea were winning the league every year by 15 points or whatever, I would get bored. You like competi The point of sport is competition at the end of the day. And I think all this chat from other clubs, fans, oh, you've bought this, you've bought that. You've still got to go and do it at the end of the day. Look at PSG. They've spent what, 2 billion euros to do nothing. So yes, they've got nice players. Yes, they've got a few French cups, but it's not an absolute guarantee of success at the highest level.
Realistically, it is though, because you have to spend money to be successful. PSG have spent money, therefore they've been successful. Chelsea have spent money, not talking about now,
But
but
they've
in
not
general,
won the
successful.
Champions League. That's
That's
what that 2 billion's for.
they'd
It's not
only
to win
won.
the
They'd only
French league.
won. Yeah, but they'd only won 2 league titles before the ownership take over. City had, I think, one. I can't remember how many league titles City had won. So it does bring success. It puts you on the map. You have to spend money. Teams can't penny pinch anymore, and this is where it's ruined it because teams can't find players out of nothing. You know, Brian Clough would not survive in today's game. Ferguson probably wouldn't survive now. You can't just bring these players together and thrive. You have to spend money to be successful, and that is the bottom line. But of course, clubs are spending too much money, but then you think, well, if you don't spend enough, what are you ever going to achieve?
Yeah, and
Let's
as long
talk
as
about like both them managers you just mentioned spent money. Like that's what I'm saying. Money's always happened to be in
Of
the
course it is,
sport,
but not on this scale. The Premier League has created this
but
monster.
the scale is also kind of inflationary as well. Because if you actually go with the money that was spent by Ferguson, by previous managers, put it in inflationary terms, then they've spent more than Mourinho, Klopp, Guardiola, Arteta. So it is a bit subjective because you can go, oh, it was only 20 million. Only 20 million back then was a lot of money. It was like, I think the British transfer record was for like Ferdinand for 30 million. And you're like, 30 million now gets you average players or average in the league at least. So I think with that, I think the money spent will always happen, and this is why there is sort of City fans have never wanted FFP because we know what it meant, and we always have said this. It was to protect what's known as the cartel. We were saying it was going to protect Real Madrid, Barcelona. It was going to protect United, Liverpool because they have the money. They already have the revenue aspects that are in. And like, yeah, City and Chelsea have been lucky that our takeovers have happened earlier. But I think FFP came in because of Chelsea when they had their takeover and Abramovich spent money and Chelsea became successful. If you spent money and won nothing, nothing would have happened. It's only until you start actually winning these titles that's when it happens. And it's the same with the sort of, like I say, with UEFA, it's the same there. They're protecting the ones that have been big for ages, and that's why I'm completely against it. I understand you want to be profitable because at the end of the day, all these teams are now businesses as well. They're not just football clubs. Then, like you've got lower, the ones that are non-league, they're just purely football clubs that you go to. These massive clubs now are businesses, and I think it's ridiculous that owners of businesses, can't spend their own money to improve their business. So that's where I think it's completely flawed in that aspect. But I do understand the aspect of you don't want Newcastle coming in going, right, I want Mbappe, I want Haaland, I want De Bruyne, I want X, blah blah blah, and then get a super team and then dominate the league for 10 years. Because, like you said, Jordan, you don't want 15 points every year. And to be fair, like I know people say City win it every year, blah, blah, blah. But if you look at how many points we win it by an odd point, especially against the sort of title races with Liverpool. We've won it by an odd point. We've only won it massively on one season. That was the Centurion season. So really, I don't think it's a massive concern yet, but I think teams should be able to spend as much as they want as long as the owner can provide the funds. And I think that's what Premier League need to look into more. The owners, can they actually afford what they're spending? If they then can't, then you put them into the profitability sort of rules. But
Yeah, it's all a double-edged sword, isn't it? Even though
yeah,
swords are generally double-edged, but it's all a double-edged sword. This is a monster the Premier League has created, as I've mentioned. The 5 teams that wanted the Premier League: Arsenal, Tottenham, Everton, Manchester United, and Liverpool. This is the beast they wanted. This is the beast they've created, and now it's got out of control. Look how much things have all gone up inflated. Like you said, inflated. You know, PSG even buying Neymar for 200 million has upped the market so much because players have gone from being worth 20 million to now being 50 or 60. They all wanted this. They all wanted this extra money, particularly the Premier League. It's their problem. It's their fault, and they've got to do something about it. And as far as I'm concerned, an Americanized version of the league will solve it, but that will take a lot of time. But the more American owners come in, then of course, the more that will speed that process along.
There you have it. Nice way to finish. As always, we want to hear from you. Pause the video, hit up the comments, let us know your thoughts. But as always, like, comment, and subscribe. You know the drill.